thank you so much for joining us. As I think we're going to have a good time today. This month's topic is all about the international standard ISO 30071 Part 1. That's the first thing you can know about the standard, which is how to actually say it, because it's not the easiest bunch of numbers to say. This is something that I led the creation of over the last sort of 5 years. It came out a few years ago, but most people are still getting to understand what it is and how to use it. It's designed to help organizations get good at accessibility, but a lot of people think that it's just for large organizations, and that's not necessarily the case. Large organizations absolutely need this, because this is all about how to get consistently good throughout what can be a large organization with lots of different products and things like that. But if you are a small organization, you can still have a lot to learn from here. So I think it should be a very interesting hour for all of you on the call. Two of us presenting this afternoon. It could be morning where you are. We do have an international audience. I'm Jonathan Hassell. I'm CEO of Hassell Inclusion, and I'm the guy who wrote this thing. So if there's anything wrong with it, chances are it was my fault. If there's anything that you don't understand in it, chances are I can explain. So that's hopefully why this is a good place for you to be for the next hour. I have Pete Bricknell with me as well. He heads up our services in this area. We're helping lots of organizations really get to grips with how they can get the best from the standard. And so we'll be kind of taking it in turns to present today. As I say, just to reiterate again, if you have questions, please pop them in the chat, because there is time at the end for those. But without further ado, I'll jump in. So we wanted to start with a section on why should you care about this standard? If you like, how is it going to help you, and how does it impact on all of the other ISO standards that you may have looked at? Because most people have some idea of what an ISO standard is. A lot of the time it does send people to sleep. This one is a lot more interesting than most. That's not me saying that. That's actually a quote directly from one of our clients. And they had been the person in their organization who did things like ISO 9001, ISO 27001, those sorts of things. So there are ISO standards out there. The big difference between 30071 Part 1 and those two standards, from my perspective, is this. If we just take 27001, this is the cybersecurity information standard. This is all about, if you don't do this as an organization, theoretically, somebody could do a cyber attack on you and steal all sorts of your data, your client's data, your customers' data, all of those sorts of things. So if you like, most of these standards feel like the price of entry. You as a business have to do these things to be professional, but you're not necessarily expecting to get a lot out of it in terms of what you're going to get. If you like, you're trying to avoid bad scenarios that you don't want to happen. ISO 30071 Part 1 is different from that. It's a little bit more involved than some, so there is a little bit more work, but it is much more rewarding for one very good reason. Unlike the rest, this one helps you win. So what could you win? Well, about 4 out of 10 of your potential users. That's really what's on offer here. That's what accessibility is all about, is trying to make sure that when you're creating things, whether they're digital things or print media for that matter, that people with a disability or people who are older can still get the messaging or the products that you're trying to put out there. So 4 out of 10 people need accessibility. And that is why you should care about the standard, because if you're an organization who have a website and you are providing information maybe to customers, you may be providing services, you may be providing products and selling things from your website, or it might be an app, or actually it may be a campaign that you've put out there to try and get messages over to people. You don't want to miss 40%. That 40% of those people, especially if the information and the products that you've got are really important, really want to know what you have for them. So because of that, and because there are lots of organizations who want that, they don't want to miss out on the 40%, then if you are a supplier, so if you're an agency creating a website, for example, for one of those organizations, or you are creating a bit of software like the Zoom that we're using today, Anybody who is buying, if you like, your product wants to know that if they care about that 4 out of 10 people, that you care too, and you can deliver something that works for everybody. They want to care, they want to know that they can rely on you. So if you are, for example, providing services to a client, they want to know that you will do this every single time. That if you've got a new project for them, that the last one was accessible, but this one isn't because it's a different team from your company who are doing this. That's the sort of thing they want to avoid. They want to know that when they're working with you, they always get great stuff. And it's exactly the same, although a little bit different, if you are a tool vendor. So for example, we're using Zoom for this call, and you can have a look at the VPAT, so the accessibility template that says how accessible Zoom is. But Zoom changes all of the time. So actually, if we made a decision at Hassell Inclusion that we should use Zoom rather than Teams, for example, because it was more accessible, it's not the case, but if we had made that decision, we wanted to make sure that if we've chosen your product because it's accessible, that halfway through the year, you don't, if you like, lose that accessibility, that all of the new features forget accessibility. So it's really, really important, especially if I've bought a service. For example, I've signed up to a telecommunication company, that if I join that company because I thought that all of their website and their mobile app to get information was accessible, if it then gets worse over the year and I can't get out of that contract, that's a really bad situation. So consistency is massively important for your customers. But the other thing is, the reason why I may have got this Zoom or Teams that we use internally at Hassell Inclusion is because we want to make sure that any staff that we have that have a disability can also use things. So if you care about diversity and inclusion in your organization, it's really important for you to be thinking about this too. So what is ISO 30071 Part 1? Well, it's a practical framework to help you strategically embed accessibility into your organization and your products. It differs from things like WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that you may have heard of, because that's a technical standard. If you like, it tells your developers, your designers, your content people what to do. ISO 30071 Part 1, if you like, enables the organization around them, all of the policies, the processes, all of that to work. Fundamentally, it enables, as I say, that whole organization to say, we don't want to just get good at this in one place. We don't want pockets of good experience. How do we share that around the organization? How do we enable our customers to know that they will always get something great from us? Efficiency. Your product teams may be doing accessibility brilliantly well at the moment, but it may be costing you more than you really want. So what is the best practice way of, if you like, getting an efficient way of putting that into your software development lifecycle process? And fundamentally, it's about making sure that the organizations that are out there who are saying great things when it comes to diversity and inclusion actually can back up those things by delivering. So if I say to the Valuable 500, for example, that I really care about making sure that people with a disability can work in my organization, how do I deliver that? How do I make sure that that happens? The ISO is a really great way of doing that. So just a couple of things before we kind of head off into, if you like, how you can sort of sort this. So as I say, it's good on cost benefits. It enables you to understand what the benefits are for your organization and how to get them in the most cost efficient way. It holds a lot of information about outsourcing, because that is really important for most organizations. Chances are you don't create your own website, products, whatever they are, and so somebody else does it for you. How do you make sure that works in an accessible way? It enables organizations to understand how much accessibility should cost, and what risk is involved, all of these sorts of things, so that they can properly manage this, and actually governance of inclusion across all of the type of digital products that they're either creating or having created for their customers or staff. Here's and you'll see these all the way through the presentation today, because we've been doing this for a while now, helping organizations. One marketing agency, this was a comment from their chief operating officer. I thought this was just for compliance, and now realize it benefits everything that we do. So Lots of people, if you like, fall into accessibility for lots of different reasons. But the key thing about what we do when we're looking at the ISO is to say, what are all of the benefits that can come from that? If you were doing great stuff for your customers, does it help your staff as well, and vice versa, that sort of thing. Also, the other big thing about the ISO is that it's when you're looking at products, it understands that the types of products that you might be creating could be very different. So it could be a campaign, for example, that has messaging across multiple channels, so stuff starts off on Facebook and then goes into videos that you put on YouTube, that go onto your website, that go onto Eventbrite to enable somebody to come to a webinar. All of these sorts of things mean that the user journey that people experience of the sorts of things that your organizations do goes across all of these different channels. And so they want to make sure that every step of that journey is good. And the way you do accessibility for PDFs and social media and mobile apps is completely different. So it enables you to understand how to handle that. Also, how to handle situations where you use a content management system or a JavaScript library to actually make your website quicker to create for you. Nobody does it from scratch anymore. So how do you make sure the tools you're using are fit for purpose? How to get things into the whole process for creating products and make sure that any risks that are in are mitigated. So that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. And just to kind of give you an idea of the complexity of this, I'm not trying to scare you, but this is what we term the accessibility ecosystem. So the sorts of things that you're probably creating are the digital tools and products at the top there, but you have all of these different technologies between those and the devices that the users are using, or even the context that those users are using your product in. All of those things can impact their user experience. So it's really important for you to start understanding how all of that plays out. Fundamentally, there are financial benefits, there are ethical benefits, there are legal benefits to this. And also, if you do all of this, you start thinking in a much more interesting and innovative way. So there's just a little bit of what you can get from this. So I'm going to hand over to Pete now to talk about what does it take to actually achieve this. Pete, over to you.
Thank you very much. So if you move on to the next slide. So the ISO is thinking about a bigger challenge than just sort of ticking boxes. And so if we think about why are we doing this, it's always worth starting from the beginning. At the top left, kind of, we want to produce some digital products that's accessible to everybody. And that's trying to give a better reach, better experience, and better results. And if you're in the private sector, it might be financial. If you're in marketing, it might be the impact of a campaign. If you're in government, it might be connecting to more citizens. And to get that working, we need that technology working. We need the people and the process. And so we talked about the WCAG standard as kind of like think about the technology and tools. And the ISO is about getting those technology, the people, the process, and the documentation all working together. Which means this is a little bit like if you ever did, your school exams, your A-levels. The exam at the end, the summer exam, is going to check if you've got your A-level, but actually to get there, you've had 2 years worth of kind of planning and producing coursework, etc. So if somebody's saying, well, all I need to do is just produce some templates and check those templates look good, that's really not achieving what we want to do. And so the ISO was developed with Jonathan, and there's some bits about, okay, here's what it looks like, but then there's the how-to. So in the end, Jonathan developed 2 books. So Inclusive Design for Products, Inclusive Design for Organizations. If you want to grab those 2 books, they kind of make the ISO a little bit more English. And they're actually free on Kindle Unlimited, or you can get them on Kindle, or ask us a great question and you can get a copy of the book. If we move on to the next slide. So how do you actually get there? How do you do your kind of like your preparation for the exam and then the exam at the end? We see there's 3 steps. The first one is benchmarking and planning. So how good are you is probably worth checking where you are at the moment. So part of that is raising the awareness. We often see people say, well, how do I deal with an adoption? How do I deal with getting buy-in? So part of the benchmark is to get people involved and build your allies, build your stakeholder group, see your pockets of greatness, see stuff that's happening in different places. And when we've done those benchmarks with teams, we discover there's some great expertise in one corner, or there's a wonderful story in another, but the whole organization doesn't realize it. And then do a benchmark. So work out what the strengths and gaps are. Think about the documentation you have, thinking about the people, the skills, the competence, the people who say I know it all but actually don't, or the people who do it but don't tell the world. How do we get a good idea of what the competence is? And then that allows you to create your outline plan and your budget and decide what's the most important thing in terms of skilling up the organization. Is it particular products? Is it particular customer areas? Do you care for the internal only? Do you care for external? So some places have said, right, well, we want to get the ISO and we want to do it for our internal IT. We want to be a brilliant employer of choice when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the broader sense, and disability is one part of it. For another organization is we want to create a great product that young and old can use, that it really doesn't matter who you are, but you can do banking, say, or you can do insurance. So that sort of gives you an idea where the gaps are. And we actually have a free scorecard which you can do a self-assessment on. Of course, being a self-assessment, it will give you a picture, but it won't be the same as somebody from the outside coming and saying, so what does it look like? So the next part is filling the gaps. And this is the hard work. We hear quite a lot of feedback of, okay, I know I need to adopt a policy, but filling in a few lines in, say, there are terms and conditions as we go and get vendors to bid for us, actually is a whole change of way that the legal team need to accept it. The people who go out to select suppliers need to be on board with it. It needs to be part of the selection criteria. It's a cultural change that's happening. So we look at training the organization, that you can go and train designers, developers, testers, think about people if you're in marketing, about campaign managers, or if you're a product manager, what happens. And then the hard part is embedding those policies and practices. We see there's probably about 30 something documents, 35, 36 policies and procedures to consider. And then actually you need to land them in the way you work. If you're a commercial organization, that goes from the way you bid, the way you price, to the statements of work you produce, to the contracts, to the build, test, etc. If you're an internal organization, it might be around doing your business case for funding, and then all the other steps in the way. So then the third part of that is to embed it in the way that you work, that the team members, the product team members know what they're doing, but it's also sustainable. You know, you want your teams to be great and they want to get promoted, and you'll have people coming in and coming out. So how do you manage that sustainability in terms of training, testing, and understanding? And the ISO says, well, okay, well then go and show that you're doing this. So you need to make sure you demonstrate delivery over time and the products. And then the final part is that kind of you're doing your exam at the end of your A levels. Have you proved that the documentation is in place? Have you proved that you've got people trained? Have you proved that the policies are being followed? And a very important part with accessibility is you can't solve everything for everybody at all times, but you might need to make some design choices. So you might say, these colors are our brand. So yes, it's not ideal, but that's our brand, and we've made a choice here. Or you might say, well, this wonderful video is brilliant, but it's not going to support certain groups of people, so we have an alternative. And you might say, well, actually, we need to make sure all our videos do have captioning on it, or transcripts, or things like that. So you need to be making choices and recording those choices. That helps you as a team down the line, but it also protects you against litigation later on. There are people who get sued for not getting this right. And if you've got some good processes, if you've got some good decision making, you can justify why you made those choices. And so the last part of assessment is show on 2 projects that you've actually followed this. So it's not just I've got a document in a folder somewhere, but I'm actually following this. So let's move on to the next slide. So there's a wealth of resources out there. As Hassell and conclusion, we like to help people. There are some free resources from us. There's other free resources from other people. And there's things that you can pay for. And so things like videos, like these webinars, they're free. There's stuff you can find on YouTube. The government produces some great posters to think about different sets. We've actually produced some posters around what it means when you have the employee life cycle. So there's stuff you can draw from. There's stuff that you can ask for help for, things like we've developed a blank plan for organizations. We can audit people, so we can look at your website and give you an idea about how well it works, and the development team can go away and say, oh, okay, so we need to improve that. So there's many resources out there. If you can just pass on to the next slide. And some of those come from the books, some of those come from the website. So I'll just go to the slide afterwards. However, one of the challenges is, okay, what is it for my size of business? And I see this a little bit like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears kind of thing. I'm too small, or I'm too big, or everybody else is just right. And there's different tools, there's different ways of thinking about it according to your size. If you're a very small organization, you want to self-serve as much as possible. As I've said, there's a number of free resources. You can grab the books, you can read the books, and that will get you some other way. You could go and ask for some of the tools and templates. We're developing example templates, so if you have nothing, you can go and grab those, or you can say we can get on ourselves. Being a small organization, I would have thought it's a lot more about very, very light soft touch guidance and governance, because it's not a large organization. And where you might want to focus is focusing on the core skills that you have internally, and also focus on procurement. So if you're going to be buying stuff from outside, making sure that they provide accessible software, tools, people to you. On a single business unit, similar type of thing, but you've probably got more people, so a more fuller benchmarking exercise makes sense. Think about the competence and skills of the team, and then prioritizing the products that you're going to look at, the training, the policies. Oh, so could somebody put themselves on mute, please? So you're creating a prioritized plan, thinking about landing those policies. What makes it more complicated, and I've worked in larger organizations, is that you either have nothing or you have 15 versions of something. And actually there's a lot of change management in encouraging everybody to join the same policy. And then if you're a multinational or multi-business unit, and we've worked with a number of global organizations, having a central team who can provide some central resources, some central training, can give you a huge amount of economy of scale. However, we've also seen vanguards in businesses saying, we are the people who are going to be the first company to implement this. And so that organization kind of sets the precedent, and then the global team then picks up that and adapts it for other countries. So you might be sitting in you might have a parent company, or you might be the central part of the business unit, multinational team, and just decide whether you're going to centralize and land, or choose a vanguard organization who solves it and then replicate that elsewhere. Okay, so that's thinking a little bit about your company growth, and over to the next slide. Then the next part of the ISO is you don't have to do everything. So there's a whole bunch of tools and techniques. You don't have to do the lot, because you only need to worry about where it fits where you are. So if you're a business unit owner, you might be thinking your focus is on procurement, requirements, testing, and proving results. And you may make an active choice in saying, I don't need to have policies in these places because we don't do that. If you're an in-house development team, you may be thinking about efficiency, competency, repeatability, and sustainability. So it's more about training, it's more about embedding it into the software lifecycle, and it's more about delivering to the business unit. If you're a supplier or a vendor, then you might be thinking much more about, well, how does that fit in our sales, our contracts upwards and our contracts downwards? Similarly to the in-house competency, the delivery, and some of the benefits will be about reputation. So how do you show that this fits across the whole of your products? Okay, moving on. So hopefully that gives you an idea a little bit about kind of the overall picture. I'm going to drop into a couple of places where we think about the benchmark. So why would we think about the benchmark, and why not just get on and do it? Well, like any of these things, it's worth planning first before doing. It helps you show how good you really are, helps clarify why you're doing it. We often find that the benchmark is a place to actually build the stakeholder buy-in. You get leaders across the business understand the why, and you refine the why we're doing this to the words and the benefits that affect your organization. If you're a bank, it might be we want to help make sure that we get fewer calls to the call center or people coming into the branch because it's easy for them to do it. I know certainly my mum struggles with online banking. Then it helps you think about the gaps and helps you define your training plan, but also the priorities of those things and get your budget. So if you're coming into budget round, now's the time to think about doing your benchmark to set a budget for next year and decide how you're going to budget it within your projects or within the corporation or organization. Okay, so what do people say about it? So one of them said, we thought it was compliance, but actually it's in everything we do. Another one said, okay, the idea is easy, but actually the hard part is booking diaries. And I might have given myself a couple of months to do the job, but getting people into the room, getting people to agree changes to templates, that actually is a lot of hard work. So if you are running a team, think quite heavily about how you're going to get your support to get time in people's diaries early on. It's a great way to build stakeholder buy-in. And another organization said, well, we thought we'd do this sort of compliance. And then it really helped us think about the process of how we do accessibility, not how we tick it at the end, but how we do it all the way through our projects. Okay, I'm going to talk about the benchmark, and I'm just going to go into one of those areas, one of the things which is slightly at the edge of the ISO, but what we found really, really helpful. So typically in a benchmark, we think about a benefits of inclusion workshop, a review of the documentation, an employee survey, talking to people around the organization to think about how does it land. So how do you build buy-in? What's going to work in their department to land this? We often do a review of sample products because that really demonstrates what's really happening. So we get one of our experts to run a live audit for a couple of hours. The development team sit around this, and there's a huge amount of aha moments of, oh, is that what it means? I see this on this page. Now I realize this across all our other sites. We need to make those changes. So it's a very, very rapid way of landing the ideas and getting people bought in and making changes immediately. Now, there's two things that's also quite helpful. One of them is a competitor analysis. We did this with one organization where the leader was trying to roll out digital accessibility across the whole of their multinational. And when they looked at themselves against competitors, it gave them a really good case to take to the board to get the right level of funding. And I think it actually doubled their budget. Whatever you're doing, it does tell you either you're doing really well compared to competitors, where your gaps are, or if you take people in other sectors, the people who you admire, what does it take to become them? And then whatever we're doing here, there's that pragmatic prioritization. So we did this with one large UK organization, and it became clear where the priorities were. It was about procurement. So let's get that bit right, because that will slowly feed us down the line. And in fact, that organization was large enough that they felt that if they can set this in the way that they procure work, that will influence the market. They are a big enough buyer that other organizations will change. Okay, I would like to move on, Jonathan, to slide 33, if that's possible.
Yep.
So I just want to drill into the kind of competitor analysis because it's not core to ISO, but it is helpful to understand where you are good and where you are actually need to put work on it. And so there's a lot to win in this. Are they ahead of you? Are they behind you? Do they talk about accessibility? Do their public sites, their websites and shop windows bear it out? And if you're a digital agency or a digital consulting firm or anything like that, is your website letting you down? You say this and you do some great stuff for clients, but actually your website needs work on it. And we know that for our own website, there's stuff that we continually go back and say, okay, we can improve accessibility here. How do the other organizations fund it? How important is this at senior roles? We see people where diversity inclusion is up at the board, but they're making statements to the Valuable 500 saying we are committed to this, and there's senior level board members who have this in their job title. What percentage of staff have accessibility in their role? That gives you a flavor for how important it is in the business. And what does your organization look like that? And then how do they win from this? What kind of awards have they been winning around their products and their services, both in the specialist accessibility space, but in wider areas? And could you be getting those awards? Could you be actually getting those awards now because you go out and tell people about it? So that kind of gives you a little bit of think about the benchmark. And I'll pass you back to Jonathan about filling the gaps.
Thanks, Pete. So, and thank you for everyone putting questions in the chat. Some really great stuff there. Keep the questions coming as we're going through. So you've benchmarked, so you know where you're good and where you're not so good. So what do you do about that? There's effectively two aspects to this in what we term filling the gaps. Embedding strategy, which is very much around policies and procedures and things like that. Training comes into there as well. And then there's process, which is very much about how to do things on a specific digital product. The question that Johnny was asking on the chat is exactly on that one. So a few things just to kind of sketch some of this in for you in the time that we have. Yeah. So ISO standards are notorious for, here are all the kind of documents that you have to have in place. And we reckon there's about 36 you need to have in place to comply with 30071 Part 1. It depends on how much you want to kind of split them up or compress them into, you could put them all in one. The key thing is that you embed accessibility in the way you do things. So for example, the way you do procurement, the way you do governance, the way you do, how do we make sure that when we're recruiting someone that we've got a good process for that. All of these sorts of things are the sorts of places that accessibility should be mentioned. And the benchmark sort of provides a list of those. We also have some template examples available so that you can say, okay, I've got a lot of documentation I need to get in place. How do I start? Well, we've got some of those that we have available. So, but the key thing that I really want to get across is one of the things that Pete mentioned earlier, which is if this is just about getting documents in place, you're missing the point. Paper is good, even digital paper of here are all of our standards on our intranet is great, but actually it needs to be in the way you actually do your business as usual. That is the thing that the standard is really advocating for. So for example, you could be putting this in your business case templates, your risk assessments, everything from your requirements analysis all the way through to your launch sort of go, no go launch decisions, and fundamentally all the way through your software development lifecycle. But the key thing really here is that you can't take somebody else's. Just because it works like that in another organization doesn't mean it will work like that in your organization. You need to take what's here and say, okay, how is it going to work in my organization with the sort of things that we do? And if you get this sort of stuff right in your policies and your processes, accessibility is so much cheaper, so much more sustainable, so much more fundamentally reliable as something that comes out of what you do. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples from this sort of space. The process, so getting accessibility, if you like, into the way products are created. There are 8 activities that are in the ISO that you need to situate in the process that you have already. We don't want you to create a new one. We want you to add these into what you do. Ideally, you'll be doing some of this stuff already, so it might be easy. But if you've got all of these 8 in there, then you're doing the right thing. The difficulty sometimes, and so the training that we do is very much about, okay, how do you do that for your organization? How, for example, do you break these down into where in the software development lifecycle? So we have what we call the 4 meetings. Where would you actually situate these? So that's the sort of thing that we're doing in that sort of process. And yes, we are talking agile here, although it does work with waterfall as well. It's process agnostic. It's activities that you add into how you do things where you are. Here's an example of one of the templates just around training, because this is one of the places that if you get things right, things really start singing. So the sorts of things that should be in your training policies around accessibility are things like who needs to be training, what roles, is it just the developers? No, it's actually all of the people who touch your digital products. Is it just them? No, it's actually all of the people who create documents for you. They want different types of training in different ways. ways and they have different importance, but it's really understanding that sort of thing and then putting together a plan to make sure that everybody who's important gets trained. But a key part of that is saying, okay, what capability do they have already? We've mentioned that surveys and things like that are so important. You know, it could be that you have people in your organization who are better at accessibility than they think, other people who think that they're really great at it, but actually their knowledge is very old. So how do you work that out? And how do you make sure that the training that you're giving people is actually good training? You know, do you buy training from a supplier like ours? Do you go to get some stuff free off the internet and hope that's going to be enough? You know, what is the right way of doing it for your organization in the way that you train people? And how do you keep people up to date? So for example, these webinars are a great way of actually keeping a lot of people up to date with what's happening in accessibility. You know, for us, what you want to be doing is embedding this across all of the roles in your organization. And you want people to be accredited. You want people to not just go on the training, but you want them to know how to apply that in their day-to-day jobs, whatever that job is. And so we provide a huge amount of training in this sort of area as part of our filling the gaps. And just some comments from people who've kind of gone through this with us. You know, we help people do their entire plans. For example, if you're a company in France, you actually have to publish a 3-year plan on your website if you're in the public sector, or you are a private sector company who have a revenue of over a particular threshold. So somebody from that world was saying, you know, we got the right balance between good PR, so we're doing the right things, but affordability, you know, we didn't want to promise the earth because people will actually judge us on this. So it was really important to get that balance right. So helping people through procurement workshops, you know, really insightful. We need to make some swift changes now because we're buying the wrong tools. We're not asking the right questions. People from digital agencies on training, you know, people love our training because what we do is we focus on application. It's not about, if you like, the stuff that's there in WCAG. That stuff you can learn in other places. It's actually about how, as a designer, you make design decisions to balance things like design and aesthetics. That's one of the hardest things for any designer to do, and you won't find that anywhere out there other than on courses like the ones that we do, because a lot of it is discussion. And then people saying that they love the way we help them do accessibility statements when we're helping them on projects as well. Those sorts of things we hear time and time again from people. So you've looked at benchmarks, you've looked at, if you like, how you get to a point where you think you might be ready to kind of be assessed. So what does assessment look like? What do you need to do to be able to prove that you are ISO 30071 Part 1 compliant, if you like? And it's a bit different from other ISO assessments. It's not pointing to a piece of paper to say you've embedded it in policies, although that is essential. So for example, those 8 activities needs to be in your software development lifecycle process document somewhere, or else you can't be compliant. But the key thing really is, and I was really careful about this when I was setting this up originally in the UK in BS 8878 back years ago, and then through the internationalization process that we went through in the last decade. It's about what you do, not about what you say. So you could have all of those bits of paper and everyone could completely ignore them. We've all been in organizations like that. So it's actually about how this stuff is actually being done on projects, which is really important. So if you like, the accreditation is to see whether or not on 2 projects you have made your decisions right, you've followed the activities, you've made your decisions in the right sort of way. You know, ideally you would do those 2 projects perfectly, as it were. And so, you know, if you're doing that, it's a good idea to put them in for an award or something like that, because you don't just want to get accreditation. It's nice to get as much as you can out of best practice. So getting your projects proof that you can actually do this in the real world. The other thing is making sure that you stay up to date. So most organizations that we're working with have a mixture of an internal team and a whole host of external suppliers, contractors in a pool, all of these sorts of things. And there is quite a churn in the creative and digital industries. So you need to make sure that you are on top of the people that you have at the moment who are working on things. Do they know how to do accessibility, or was it the people you trained 6 months ago who have now left your organization? The other thing is, if it is the same people, then has accessibility moved on? So you need to make sure that they're kept up to speed as well. Because again, that is what if I was asking you to create something for me and you said, yes, we have this certification, that's what I would be expecting. That's what I'm looking for from this. So that's the sort of stuff which is there in the assessment of compliance. It is quite rigorous, but it's a really, really helpful and useful thing. Just to prove that people can get there, here's a story from around about 2015. So BS 8878, which was the British forerunner to ISO 30071 Part 1, came out in 2010. I published my first books explaining to people on how to do things with it around about 2014. And a year later, I had a phone call to say, we've read your book and we've done it. We've implemented your book. Can you come and check it? So it was the first time I'd ever experienced a call like that. And we went and they got a lot of things right. They got a lot of things wrong. And there was a lot of people who needed training. But over the course of a couple of months, we were able to take what they had done already and enrich that with the sorts of things to get them to the right place so that they were able to achieve BS 8878 accreditation. As I say, these days, it's the ISO. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's based on the same thing. And, you know, people really can do this and it really does work. So I want to hand over to Pete just for just a little wrap up on what you can do now, and there'll be time for questions after this.
Okay, if you want to just move on to the next slide. So we kind of went through a journey within Hassell Inclusion thinking, great, there's a standard, Jonathan has written the standard, congratulations, we can now go home. And then realized, well, actually, you need to do some how-to. So he wrote 2 books, and then we realized, well, actually, yeah, we need to do training, but it's not just tick the boxes on WCAG, it's the how-to on the training. So we started developing a number of training courses. We've been working with some large organizations around how that works for them, and that's been really helpful in influencing that. And then it's like, okay, what you're going to need to do some policies. Well, okay, so then we'll need some templates. And so we've been going away and thinking, so what does those templates look like? We've been advising organizations around kind of accessibility templates, and we've been developing a pile similar to the ISO. And then it came to, well, actually, how do we help people get there? And so that's why we ended up building the I kind of ready steps approaches and what you're seeing here. So next slide, Jonathan. And so we're back to the 3 bears problem. And there's several people who've been saying in the chat, so how do we build buy-in? Because this is a nice idea, but now's not right because I'm too small. This is a nice idea, but now's not right because we're too large. It's a nice idea, now's not right because we haven't got the budget. Well, actually, there's a carpe diem, let's get on and do it. So what does that mean? What could you do now? So if you just come to the next slide. And we've actually been, we have an idea for the plan. So how do you get there? But what would be the get going? We've got to get this done now. What should we do? And I think one part is doing the employee survey. If you're as a minimum knowing where the gaps are. And I've worked in places where you'll have some expertise who say, look, I've read all the books, I'm really good at accessibility, let me do the training. And that's great. Or you might want to say, well, let's just go and check how we think we're doing. And this can be done with any other part of this parallel with the ISO work. Just getting people skilled up and doing it is a great thing to do anyway. The next part is get real. Work out how you really are. We have a free scorecard. Hopefully somebody will get that into the chat, or you just go onto our website and search for the accessibility scorecard. Have a go, see where you are. What we suggest is a non-technical person and a technical person do it together, because it's got questions across the business, and it takes about 15-20 minutes, and that will give you an idea of where you are, where your gaps are, and the report comes back with some suggestions. Build your allies. This is really hard to do by yourself. So find some other people who are passionate about it. Find some people who've got stories. There are many people in organizations who have hidden disabilities, and there's many people who have obvious ones. work with people to get those stories out. And we on High Hub, I've put together a presentation around kind of building buy-in. So some tips around benefits, some tips around how to think about change management, and then align this with your organization goals. The great thing is if you can find a big statement from a senior person saying we're going to do this, accessibility or diversity inclusion is really, really important to our organization. You can go back to them and say, hey, if we work towards the ISO, this is a visible demonstration of what you've just told everybody. And it can go into winning awards, it can go into your marketing messages, it can go into those outside managements. And then consider doing a benchmark to get your budget and plan. It's really difficult to get the budget to do everything at once, and you might need to do some demonstrations for 1 or 2 products to show the impact, and then, oh, there's the aha for everybody else. But the most important is changing behaviors. This is not just about defining templates. In fact, if you just build the documents, they will sit on OneDrive or Google somewhere and not get used. But the whole importance of this is the websites have a really great user experience for as many people as possible, or your digital sites or your landing pages or your surveys. So we would love to hear from you. We have spoken to people who said, yeah, Hassell Inclusion, we'd want you to do it. We've worked with organizations where they got multiple agencies in there who are our competitors, but we work alongside them and we do our bit and they do their bit. Or if you're just going to do it yourself, we'd love to hear how you're doing on the journey. You know, our motto at Hassell Inclusion is accessibility for all, and how we get there is multiple ways. But if we can be part of your journey, we would love to. But if you're going to do it yourself, great, let's hear about how it goes. And so at the end of this, feel free to get in touch. So this has probably raised a bunch of questions. We've seen some really useful stuff in the chat.
Sure, I've just been going through answering quite a lot of them, but I want just briefly for those that we haven't answered already. Bob Shakespeare was asking about mental health conditions. Can one page be accessible to all? Because a lot of people miss mental health conditions. Yeah, it's difficult to make a page that works for absolutely everybody, especially as people's requirements, especially around cognitive impairments or anything like that, can be different from other people's. So personalization is always the best route. If you can't do one thing for everybody, then personalize. But the key thing really is to not forget people. I loved his question because people generally do tend to forget people with mental health conditions, although they are very much part of disability as defined, certainly here in the UK, by the Equality Act.
And Jonathan, can I just add to that? So one tip we would give organizations is when you think about projects and you define some personas, is include the breadth of diversity and inclusion in those personas. So disability is one of them, but include others so that when somebody designs a solution, they are thinking of people from different backgrounds, different life experiences, the range of disabilities, as well as their target audiences, which might be about location, income, and age, so that they are actually thinking about all those users.
So a couple of other answers. So N. Marsh was asking about should government procurement contracts of over 100,000 require suppliers to carry the ISO? That's not a question that we could answer in terms of, that's government policy. They make up their own policy in these sorts of areas. Do we think that would be a good thing? Yes, absolutely. But it's not for us to say. We certainly do know that there are government frameworks which have been requiring people to meet ISO, so that they're on that journey already. Javier's question about, as a digital agency, to offer expertise on accessibility, is the ISO a good idea? Yeah, I mean, if you're going to offer advice, it's good to be good at it, and so you want some proof. And we as an agency have been going for 10 years now, and I've been working in this area for 20, and all of our consultants have at least 10 years experience. So we've got a reputation already that people would listen to us. If you want to short circuit that process, process and prove that you are good at this and you are worthy of listening to, then certainly if you were to get to the ISO accreditation, that would really prove that not you personally, but your organization there. This is an accreditation which is not on a person, it's on an organization, because no one person creates a product. And this is all about organizations and sustainability and reliability. So as I say, yeah, if you are, if your organization is already bought into the idea and the value of accreditation with things like ISO 9001, that sort of thing, then it's probably easier for you to, if you like, sell this internally in the organization, say this could be another one of those things that's worth doing. If you like, that's why I spent loads of time, effort and money actually making this ISO in the first place, because it puts accessibility into the same ballpark, if you like, as quality and information security. And that's a very good place to be. So use that well, please.
Okay, and Jonathan, just adding
yeah.
to that for 1 second, telling people you're on the journey is probably half the step. So using this as a right, we're stepping this on a program where we're heading towards the ISO standard, gives the organization a target. You can tell people outside that you're on the process, rather than hiding yourself waiting till somebody can give you a stamp. So
Yeah.
if you're starting the process, think about this as a message of the journey.
Really quickly, Kinga's question, she was saying, should I do WCAG or ISO? It's not either or. WCAG is a level for an individual product. ISO is a level for the people creating that product. So it's not, WCAG is the accepted label out there, because it's the accepted label for websites and a little bit more. But for example, if you're trying to do accessibility on a robot or a campaign, then that's not going to get you what you need. ISO is the thing that fits around it and enables an organization to get there. Hey, thank you so much for your questions today. We've asked as many of them as we can. The key thing is we believe that everybody can get good at this. If you come to these sessions, then you can be that solution within your organization. We would love to provide some sort of resources which can help you do that. That's why we created HiHub. If you go on to hasselinclusion.com, it's right up in the top right corner. You can click on there and register, and you can get access to loads of stuff like this completely for free. And we're hoping that that's really going to help a lot of you on your way. Things like the buy-in toolkit, I mentioned it as an answer to one of the people out there who was asking, how do I get people to say yes to this? Pete did some amazing work on this, and it's brilliant. So go grab it. And next month, we are going to go deeper into, well, what if my product is this? What if my product is this? You don't do accessibility in the same way on everything. There are certain things in WCAG that actually, if you like, transfer across lots of different things. But for example, it doesn't mention anything about how big your font should be, which makes loads of people who do anything around PDFs and print go, really? So what do you need to do for the different types of products that you might be creating? Because it's not just websites these days, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope that's been of huge use to you. As I say, another hour of this sort of great stuff coming along in about a month's time. In the meantime, go grab HiHub and you can get loads more whenever you want it. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon, everybody.